So today we're looking at the glass negatives from the Department of Agriculture. Before we do, I would just like to acknowledge country. I acknowledge First Nations peoples of the various lands on which we meet. I acknowledge First Nation peoples as the keepers of languages and cultures that enrich our connection to country. As the oldest knowledge holders and the first recorded holders and archivists of cultural heritage connected to the lands we live on and work on today, I extend this respect to all First Nations peoples and elders past and present. And I'm coming to you from Darug country. So today we're looking at the glass plate negatives from the Government Printing Office, but more particularly we're looking at consignment 4 of these, which is known as NRS 4481-4. So we have recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, digitised consignment 4, as well as the public works negatives. It also includes over 6,700 Department of Agricultural glass negatives, primarily with dates from 1892 to 1914, but most are undated. In addition, there's about another 2,700 agriculture glass negatives in consignment 3, and they have good titles and dates ranging from 1908 to the 1950s. Now, consignment 4 came from the Government Printing Office to the State Library in 1959, and then onto the State Archives collection in 1961. The thing is, with consignment 3, it was created by the Government Printing Office itself, and there are marvellous registers with dates and titles. But the Public Works Department, and as far as we know, the Department of Agriculture, didn't keep registers, so we're missing this information. Consignment 3 is available digitally on the websites of both State Library of New South Wales and New South Wales State Archives Collection. And we sincerely thank the State Library of New South Wales for allowing us to copy their digital copies and titles onto our website. Consignment 3 has a unique running number, so every negative has its own number. And as I said, there are registers that actually link those numbers to titles and dates. Just a brief look at the negative sizes. What I find interesting about this is that the public works negatives were primarily 10 by 12s and 8 by 10s, so quite large negatives, whereas the Department of Agricultural images are much smaller glass negatives, half plates and quarter plates, but still quite clear for all of that. A word about conservation and digitisation. We digitise to preserve material. It also makes it accessible, but the main reason is preservation. And the materials that are at risk, and therefore the ones that we have priority in our digitisation program, are in fact the acetate negatives, films, cassettes, magnetic audio reels, video formats, and computer medias. So strangely enough, more recent media is more likely to deteriorate quicker than older things such as glass negatives. Particularly with the nitrate and acetate negatives, they will actually shrink. The different layers of the material will shrink in relation to each other, and the only way you can save them is to preserve them. Glass negatives break, but they are much, much more stable. Apologies, here you see some of our staff undertaking the boxing, cleaning, dusting and wrapping, and of course the photographing of NRS 4481-4. So what is the role of the Department of Agriculture? Primarily to research, educate and advise. It was established in 1891 as part of the Department of Mines and Agriculture. And then it went on in 1907 to be created as a separate department with the first director appointed in 1908. Right from 1891, it said that its role was to research, educate and advise, and there's always been a strong commitment to regional involvement. In 2024, it's now part of the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. If you go onto our website, you'll see administrative histories for agencies. And to find out what records we hold from each agency, go to the bottom of that administrative history and click on See All Series under the title Created Series. What we're looking at today are negatives that were created for the Agricultural Gazette and then used in other guides such as the Farmers and Fruit Growers Guide, the Farmers Bulletin, Science Bulletins and the Farmers Handbooks. The Agricultural Gazette had a very long run. It was first published in 1890 and it ceased publication in 1982, with a special edition brought out in 1990 for the centenary. And its purpose right from the start was to educate farmers by publishing news and research. Now, it's not on microfilm and it's not digitised for the general public. The State Library Catalogue describes it as including articles on farming methods, new technologies, and discoveries in the agricultural industry. But it also reported on local events such as prizes won in local agricultural shows. Officers each year in the department's annual report reported on what articles they had contributed to the Gazette. In 1906-07, Joseph Maiden contributed articles on weeds in New South Wales and useful Australian plants. The chemist Frederick Bickle Guthrie on the use of fertilisers and lime and wheat characteristics, and in association with Maiden on pest plants such as water hyacinth. That entomologist Walter Wilson Froggatt wrote about rabbits and ants, the botfly in the Inverell district, the elephant beetle, and the climbing cutworms at Tamworth. I have a strong suspicion that for the officers, this was actually part of their key performance indicators, because every year you get this list of articles at the end of their little mini reports within the annual reports. And in fact, in 1910-11, the editor of the Gazette said that he wanted the officers to write farmers' bulletins, but they first insisted on publishing in the Gazette. And so you tend to think that this was part of their job, very much so. So here we have one of the images where in fact you can see the words Agricultural Gazette New South Wales written over the top of the negative. And this is quite common on these negatives. By the way, the little boy above the sheep is in fact not on his mobile phone, which many people may look and think. He's actually using a notebook, a forgotten thing for today. In 1910-11, the department decided to not include the scientific articles in the Agricultural Gazette unless they were pertaining to the alteration of existing farm practices. They wanted the journal, the Gazette, to be a practical monthly journal, to be read, as the secretary said, with one hand on the plough. They also decided to appoint an assistant editor whose job was to actually simplify the articles to make them suitable for reproduction in the local papers and thereby reaching a larger audience. The Gazette did have a subscription of about 14,000 to 15,000 people a month, but obviously the newspapers reach many more people than that. But the newspapers were always interested in articles from the Gazette and the activities of the department and of Gazette editors. And they would often republish articles in the paper even before 1910-11. So here we have a reference to a trial of Hall's champion cultivator at Woodlands Thornley. And there is special mention of the fact that the editor of the Gazette was present and Mr. Burton of the photographic department of the Agricultural Gazette was present, and that photographs were taken on the day. And here we have those photographs from our digitised negatives. The Farmers and Fruit Growers Guide was basically created from articles that had been published in the Agricultural Gazette and was designed almost like a textbook. But they did recommend that people still look at the Agricultural Gazette for the latest information from reliable sources. There are illustrations in the Farmers and Fruit Growers Guide, such as this one of typical specimens of turnips grown at Wagga Wagga, which we in fact have the original negative for. The guide was replaced by the Farmer's Handbook in about 1910-1911. altered and rearranged to form a textbook for students in our agricultural colleges and schools, as well as for farmers generally. And they decided to cut the fruit industry out and do a separate publication. The foreword to the second edition in 1916 talked about the fact that they'd made extensive use of various articles from the Agricultural Gazette. So again, we get that filtering of articles from the Gazette through to other publications. And the handbook included information on the chemistry of soils, farm holdings, including fencing, water drainage, buildings, trees for shade, crops such as wheat, cereals, root, leguminous, other crops, vegetables, grasses, native fodder, silos, seeds, weeds, lots of information for the farm handyman, and beekeeping. And the Farmers and Fruit Growers Guide has been digitised on the State Library of New South Wales website, and the Farmers Handbook 3rd edition 1918 is available digitally from the National Library of Australia's website. So lots and lots of illustrations. So here we have two relating to knots, the short splice, and another lot relating to harness. Now, the Farmers Bulletin were established from 1907 on. They're smaller both in size and in the number of pages, and they were meant to be a complete story, if you like, a do-it-yourself publication for the farmer, and treated in, as the Secretary said, a practical and simple manner so as to make it acceptable to the man for whom it is intended. And that man was not just the farmer, but every rural worker in the state who desires to be kept informed as to the progress of his special branch. Now, both the State Library of New South Wales and the National Library of Australia have copies of these. I did mean to mention that we don't have the Agricultural Gazette here, nor the Farmers Bulletins. So you'd need to go to libraries for those. And they've even digitised some of them on their websites. So here we have an example of Fence and Fencing, Farmers Bulletin number 74, and this is from the State Library of New South Wales. And in this case, what they've done, they were building fences at the Cowra farm, and they decided to trial different types of fencing, different types of material, posts, how close together the posts should be. If you keep the posts further apart, you use a dropper, and so on and so forth. And here we have one of the images in that bulletin, in the bulletin, Fences and Fencing, and we have the digitised version of the negative from the glass negative. And it's showing a 2-rail fence and 2-wire fence. The cost without wire is 6 shillings per rod. Here we have another set of photographs from Fences and Fencing. And I want to emphasise the fact that often the photographs are not just isolated incidents, they're actually part of a sequence. In this case, you have 8 photographs showing the stages gone through to square a gate post. And then we have the actual images, the original images themselves, which had the title on the box that they are in of Manual Training Cowra. So there's the first 4, and then there's the next 4, including the last one where the gentleman is sitting down smoking his pipe because he's finished the job. Here's one from the Farmers Bulletin number 52, Fruit Drying, and it's showing the packing of dried fruits at the Wagga Wagga orchard. And there we have the original glass negative digitisation. Images were used in the Gazette, they would be used in the bulletins, they would also be used in the handbooks and the guides. So here we have that same one that was in the handbook, which is the short splice, and the example from the digitised version of the glass negative. And again, we have the harness fitting and repairing, Farmers Bulletin number 45, showing leather making. And that's actually the creating a strap, creasing the strap. So what were the Agricultural College and the experimental farms? The Department of Agriculture set up the Agricultural College to train people in farming. They also set up the experimental farms throughout the state, and these were designed to actually trial different, not just different types of crops, but also different types of the same crop. So different variations of wheat, different variations in the orchards of apples, pears, and so on and so forth, to look at the climatic conditions, to look at the soils and the type of fertilizer they would need, when they actually would be planted, when they would produce a crop. And they also even looked at, particularly in fruit, how well that crop would travel to England and how well it would be received in England. And these things are all reported in the annual reports, which are available in the parliamentary papers. So you had demonstration farms, you had experimental farms, you had the viticulture stations, although the one at Belmont didn't last very long, and then it went to Raymond Terrace, and then it seems to have gone to Narara in the Central Coast. So, and I've just listed those up until the period we have the glass negatives on. I'm sure that there were more established after that. So here we have two images from the dairy class at the Hawkesbury Agricultural College, presumably studying the chemistry of milk. We have an image of the gold medalists from the Hawkesbury Agricultural College. The image of the room is interesting. I don't know whether it is at that college or not, but the amount of detail, the shaving equipment, the tennis racket up on top of the cupboard, the family photographs, and the sketch of the horse makes for a really interesting photo. Here we have the construction of the laboratory at the Wagga Wagga Experimental Farm, and that was opened in January 1898. This is the agricultural show of 1906, showing the products of the experimental farm at Bathurst. And you can see the range of products that they had and the varieties of products. And there's quite a few images of show exhibits like this in the collection. Here we have the apprentices' quarters at the Wallumbah Experiment Farm. It wasn't just the Hawkesbury Agricultural College that was aimed at students. There's also the Bathurst, the Wagga and the Yanco experimental farms. They also had students. And by 1913, there were apprentice schools at the Wallumbah, Cowra, Glen Innes and Grafton farms as well. And we don't know exactly which place these boys were studying in, but there is a lovely sequence of photos, including the one that was used in the cover of these apprentices. Here we have Welcome to Pera. So this is the Pera Boar farm near Burke. The experimentation and the research. Here we have the laboratory, and we believe one of these two gentlemen would have been Frederick Bicknell Guthrie, the chemist. And over on the other side, given the fact that he's holding a row of insects, it's possibly Walter Wilson Froggatt, who is the entomologist. By 1908, there were over 70 farmers' experimental plots throughout New South Wales, and these ranged from 1 to 20 acres. And basically, they went out into a local area. A farmer let them use their part of his property to grow different types of the same crop and to experiment with whether it was to be manured, how many seeds were to be sown, whether it was to be unmanured, what type of manure to use, that sort of thing. And the 1908-09 annual report says that the farmers were very taken with the idea, and that the department had received more offers of plots than they could try new wheats out on. The 1910-11 annual report stated, "There is no doubt that our instructors and experts must act as missionaries and go out and bring the gospel of advanced methods right to the farmer's own door." So here we have the lovely sign on those potato crops to tell you that they're all satisfaction and that some of them were manured and some of them were unmanured. Lectures in local areas, demonstrations to members of the public were all part of the role of the department. And here we have members of the public at a demonstration given by George Marks on ensilage making, with their lovely hats. Just a word about titles, dates, and how you find items on our website. So we use the agency, the title the image was assigned to by the agency, and that's often not the reason why you can see it. And our titles have come from the boxes and can be very brief indeed. We've also got titles from the backs of the negatives. This one appears to be the principal's house at the Hawkesbury Agricultural College. This one is paddocks, crops being harvested after a storm in 1911. Here's one where they've actually written dried fruit grown at Yanko Experiment Farm on the negative. And of course, we're also getting the titles from the actual publications. So while the box just said that it was harness, the publication talks about showing the correct length of the back chain, tug and breeching chain, and gives a much more fulsome description. Notice also in the publication that you've actually lost the trees in the background and the buildings as well. So you can search on our catalogue under NRS-4481-4 using the words Department of Agriculture, and I've added the word apple. If you find something that you like, check to see what else is in the box, remembering that in fact our boxes are quite deeper and may contain 4 or more jobs. So if you actually reorganise them by the image number, that will help. Once you've found an image you want, click on the little image on the image gallery to open it up in its own window. From that window, you can in fact right-click and save as to download a low-resolution copy of the image. And you can also click on the little symbol at the end of the banner to open up only that image into the screen. You can tag items, but just remember that other people can see the tags. And if you want information on citing and publishing, there is a guide on our website. If you'd like to see how a glass negative was created, there is a story about that on our website, and also a story that shows our conservators unboxing a glass plate negative. Now, who were the photographers? Unfortunately, we don't know because there's no mention of who the photographers are in the public service lists for the Department of Agriculture. There are illustrators listed, who are Edwin Merrin Gross and Henry Sylvester Burton. And the newspaper articles hint that the illustrators might have taken the photographs. But by 1907, they were both moved into the government printing office. So it's possible that government printing office photographers took the photographs after that. They just weren't recorded in the normal sequence. There are some photographs of some of those illustrations. And here we have one by E.M. Gross and one by H.S. Burton. But we can find information on the photographer's methods from the images themselves. And the first thing a successful photographer needs is a ladder. And my thanks to my colleagues Colin and Rhett for pointing this out to me. So on the image on the left, we can see the public works photographer has captured another photographer on his ladder at the opening of the cenotaph at Martin Place in Sydney in 1929. But obviously, if you're going to photograph agriculture, you need a big ladder. And if you are publishing the image into a gazette or a newspaper, you need a green screen, or as it was probably technically known in those days, a canvas sheet. And you also need 2 men to hold it. Now, you could put your green screen up on a board, or again, you can get 2 men to hold it. And with the fence on the right, the fact that the canvas sheet is behind the fence but in front of the horses tells us that they wanted to photograph the fence and not the horses. You could also tack your canvas screen to a building, particularly if you didn't want to get too close to the bees during a bee demonstration. If you haven't got a canvas screen, you can always paint out around the image that you want, and that way you can isolate a single ostrich out from the rest of the pack and the ducks. But you may also need a bird or an animal whisperer to make your subject sit up and take notice of the camera. This works for chickens and it works for ducks. But pigs, frankly, can't be bothered to pose. They're more interested in other things. Sheep are quite happy to pose. Bulls may need more than one handler. They are very large animals. But cows are quite contented to pose. Horses are child's play, but camels, frankly, are just too tired to care. Not every animal whisperer will appear in the publication, not even when they're disguised as grass. A uniform helps keep you in the photograph, even if the background has been painted out. You also need something to show the scale of what it is that you're trying to photograph. A hat is always useful and is generally available. I'm not certain if the pipe in the bottom of the image adds to the usefulness of the hat scale. A fork and a shovel are also useful. An umbrella can be used if necessary if you haven't got a fork or a shovel. But frankly, the human figure is probably the best method. Now, I think the man on the right is actually standing on a ladder and not on the girl's shoulder. Using a child on their own is very cute, but it really doesn't help you with the scale because you don't really know how old they are or how tall they are. Plus, the little boy on the left looks quite apprehensive about what's going on. Whereas the child on the right, I guess he's got daddy next to him, so he's quite happy with the event. In the experiment plots, the same crop would be grown alongside each other and watered or fertilised differently. So in fact, to show the scale of this, if you're using the same figure, that's actually quite useful. And now I don't think the man on the right, who is the same as the person as the man on the left, is crouching down. I think that that particular crop is just so much taller than the crop on the left. But the best thing, of course, is to use a ruler of some sort, bearing in mind that it would have been imperial and not metric. But wait, there's more. So we've got cereals, we've got wheat, we've got corn, and they like to have compare and comparisons. So you've got deep bright plump corn and pinched pointed grain. We've got oats, we've got other forms of cereals. We've got peaches and cherries, the Alberta peach. And for those of you who think that money doesn't grow on trees, we've got the coin there to show the scale of how big the peaches are. There are lots of images of pests to growing. So you've got fungi, you've got lots of images of insects. So here we have rotting fruit and a diseased branch. There are images of machinery that they were trialling at the various farms and experimental college and at the college as well, the Hawkesbury College. This is a feedlot, which would have been before 1914 because that's when our images stop. You've got cheese making at the Hawkesbury Agricultural College. And you've got a public demonstration of making an ensilage stack of an unidentified crop in January 1912, again with lots of lovely hats. Now here we have a silo under construction, and there's a series of photographs starting from the very base and working your way up until the silo is completed. There are lots and lots of photographs of trees, and often they will actually have as the title maiden trees, indicating that they're in fact commissioned and taken for Joseph Henry Maiden of the Botanic Gardens. So often you will see an officer's name as part of the title, such as Manager Hawkesbury Agricultural College. Doesn't mean it's a picture of the manager, it just means these photographs were taken on his behalf. He is the client, if you like. We have an olive tree branch and we have bottles of olive oil. One of the interesting things is the variety of the same types of fruits that are showing up in these photographs: pears, apples, oranges, and so on. And that was one of the roles of the orchards, the experimental orchards, was to actually trial different types of fruit, the date of blooming, the date of harvesting, what the crop was like, what the quality was like. And you do see some interesting titles, and these all get reported on and published in the annual reports. Here we have the flowers of Packham's late pear, and there's a number of photographs of fruit flowers in these photos. And here we have a photograph of the two varieties of pear, the Beau Claric and the Madame Henry d'Esport, along with a 6p coin for scale, which is 5 cents in decimal coinage. And then you have a photograph of them, the pears cut open to show the quality of them. There are lots of images of hands doing things, close-up of hands, such as this one, which is preparing a plant or stem for grafting, and this one, which is sharpening a saw. Actually, quite a few images of tools being sharpened or being used. There's a sequence showing how to actually use a scythe as well. As I mentioned, there are a number of images that actually run through a sequence, and it's important to actually look there for it, not just the image you found, but what else is in the box. So here we have a sequence which relates to apples in an orchard being transported to market. So here they are, there's the fruit picking stage. And here we have the cart being unloaded and the fruit being boxed. Then we go on to the boxes of fruit being put onto a wagon, presumably to be transported to the railway station. And I do feel sorry for the gentleman under who is actually holding the box up to the other one while they stand still for the photographer to take the photograph. The boxes of fruit get to the railway station and are unloaded onto the railway carts. Now, the boxes over on the left of the image are all stamped with Dural. So I do wonder whether or not these may in fact be photographs taken of the Dural demonstration orchard in Sydney. Finally, the fruit has reached the Belmore markets, and we know that the Belmore markets were demolished in 1913, so these photographs have to have been taken before 1913. And you've got the carriages of the fruit sellers and greengrocers who have gone to the market to pick up fruit. And finally, we have the image of the H. Black, who's commission agent, whose name was written on the boxes, and here's his stall inside the Belmore markets. And the fruit is ready to be sold to those greengrocers. We have photographs of preserved fruit. We have photographs of the cannery at the Hawkesbury Agricultural College. We have photographs of trays of fruit drying. We're not certain whether W. Gross is the official who asked for the photograph or whether this is Gross's farm, but given the ages of the people in it, it does look like it's a family farm rather than one of the experimental orchards. There are photographs of the horses and men at the stables at the Hawkesbury Agricultural College. And of course, the stables at the Hawkesbury Agricultural College is now part of the University of Western Sydney. We have this sequence of 3 photographs that shows a horse being loaded onto a ship. So here he is on the wharf. Now he's being swung up onto the ship, and now he's ready to be put down onto the ship itself and doesn't look as though he's particularly happy about it. But exporting horses overseas was in fact a very viable industry. And here we have a sequence of photographs showing the steps to make a millet broom. Now these photographs were taken at the farm of Albert Marsh of Palmer's Channel, Clarence River, a successful millet grower and broom maker. And the reason we know this is because these photographs were also published in the Australian Town and Country Journal on the 29th of July 1914. So this first image is the hand power hackler for removing the seed from the millet. And these photographs were first taken for the Agricultural Gazette in July 1914. They were subsequently used in the Farmers Bulletin in 1915. Here we have another step where he's actually tying up the millet together and compressing it. Now we see him on the wiring machine where he's putting bunches of millet together, and it's looking a little bit more broom-like. This looks much more like a broom, so all the millet is together, and he's now sewing the broom. On this one, he's actually guillotining the bottom of the broom so that it's all level. And you can see that the sewn broom is lying along the guillotine. And then we have some examples of the final finished product, the brooms. Here we have another sequence, and these were used in the Farmers Bulletin number 69, which is Explosives in Agriculture, Clearing by George Marks, and it was published in 1913. So this first one has the caption, dipping the rack a rock plugs in Meyerburn oil at Mr. H.B. Favell's farm, Bonneville, autumn 1912. Here we have some more photographs of Mr. Marks, also at H.B. Favell's farm. We've got an example of the value of explosives in blowing out the earth and shattering the barrels so that a good fire can be started. And we have the battery used for firing the charges. We here at State Archives Collection have nicknamed this dog Fido, and we hope that he lived a safe and happy and long life blowing up things with his master. But unfortunately, he does not appear in the 1919 edition Farmers Bulletin, Clearing the Land with Explosives. But maybe he was just retired by then. Here we have a photograph taken of the explosion of a tree stump. And here we have another one that was in the publication, which has the title, Public Demonstration at Nimbin, about 80 people present. So about 80 people came along to look at the tree stumps being blown up. And again, we've got some lovely hats. And another image from that same publication. And this was at Mr. G. Eaton's farm at Nimbin. And after the explosion, a large mahogany stump, 9 feet in diameter at ground level, was lifted out and shattered by 5 pounds of gelignite. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who have a photograph of their family around a blown up tree stump in their family album, wondering what it entails. And what it basically means is that the Department of Agriculture was in your area and taking photographs, and that's how they ended up in your family album. This one, we don't know who the family are, but again, some lovely hats. What did we find in the collection that we didn't expect? These images showing damage after the San Francisco earthquake. So we know that it's San Francisco, even though there's no caption. It just says Mr. Allen, California 06 on the box, because the sign in the middle of the picture says that it's Roos Brothers. And in the background, you can see the Call Tower, later known as the Central Tower, which survived the earthquake. And here we have the report in the annual report of William John Allen talking of his visit in August 1906 to the different fruit growing centres of the western part of America, and how he went to Washington, Oregon, California, and British Columbia. And here we have the second image. There's only these two images. The second image of what has to be damage from the San Francisco earthquake. The other thing we didn't expect from these negatives was how many houses there would be in them, how many houses and families. And it is difficult sometimes trying to decide which images belong to Public Works and which images belong to the Department of Agriculture. But in this case, these ones definitely have Agricultural Gazette written on the box. And part of the reason appears to be that the Agricultural Gazette decided it wanted to illustrate an article called Attractive Rural Homes in New South Wales. And hence we have some of these images. Now, I don't know whether or not any of them is the family home that's referred to of Mr. J.E. Whiteley of Goori. They're not identified to that extent. But we do have lots of images of rural homes with families in front of them. We also have photographs of families themselves. Again, we don't really know why. This one on the right, sorry, on the left, definitely has a title written on the top of it, which you can just see, of Mr. Richardson, Elderslie, Camden. I don't know whether the photograph was taken for Mr. Richardson or whether this is the Richardson family and why they took a photograph of the family. Is he an employee of the Agricultural Department? Were they visiting to take pictures of trees on the day? And again, the one on the right just has the caption on it, Western Plains. We've no idea who the people are. Likewise, we do not know who these families are. Were they the families of employees at the experimental farms, the experimental orchards, or the colleges? We just don't know. And finally, I'd like to leave you with a mystery. Again, the emphasis on looking at what else is in the box to try and get the whole story. So here we have a bunch of negatives that are in the one box, but how are the negatives related and who are the people? So here we have what is presumably father, mother, and son. The mother has some beautiful knitting and there are lots and lots of plants. Again, we have the back of the house with the bird and lots of plants. The conservatory, again, lots of ferns, lots of plants. On the right, it looks like a little mini greenhouse that he's put together along with the aviary. It shows a definite love of plants. On the left, we have the mother and son again. And if the image, I don't know if you can see the detail in the knitting that woman is doing. That is a huge piece of knitting, potentially a shawl, and beautifully patterned. And then we have the two men sitting underneath that huge tree fern on the right. So who are these people? I'm wondering whether or not the gentleman on the right is in fact Joseph Henry Maiden, who is, of course, the director of Botanic Gardens and the government botanist from 1896 to 1924. It looks like him to me, but maybe somebody out there can tell me. But who is the gentleman on the left? And why are there these images of illustrations, drawings in the same box? Is in fact the man one of the illustrators of plants? Is it E.M. Gross or H.M. Burton, or is it somebody else? I don't know at this stage, and we would love somebody to tell us how these images relate to each other. But we know they do relate to each other because they're all in the same box. So what do I want you to remember? You can search our catalogue to see what's been digitised using NRS-4481-4 and the words Department Agriculture. You can then add the word that you want to add to that if you want to have a look at cows or horses or wheat or whatever. But just bear in mind that the titles that are in the catalogue may not reflect what you can see in the image, because they're the titles that we've gleaned either from the boxes, they're the titles that were given by the agency originally, they're taken from the backs of negatives, and sometimes they'll be taken from publications. The importance of context in archives, who created the records and why, impacts what was actually taken and how those images will look. The relationship between the records is important. What else was photographed at the same time? Check and see what else is in the same container. And these images are evidence of the Department of Agriculture's mission to raise the quantity and quality of crops, animals and fruit in New South Wales, and to increase the knowledge of the farmer and the fruit grower. Did they succeed? Well, in the annual report of 1910 to 1921, which is the 21st anniversary of the department, the secretary certainly believed they had done so. In 1890, New South Wales exported over 170,000 bushels of wheat, but imported over 350,000 bushels. In 1911, New South Wales will export 15 million bushels of wheat, worth more than 2.5 million pounds. In 1890, there were 3 pit silos in New South Wales. In 1911, there were 364 silos in New South Wales. During that 21-year period, there was a 50% population growth in the state. There was a 257% increase in area under crop and a 325% increase in yield of wheat, and a 314% increase in butter production. So that was what the secretary believed. He believed they had done what they had set out to achieve. Finally, I'd like to thank Trove and the National Library of Australia. Where would we be without Trove? The State Library of New South Wales, the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development's Library Services, the City of Sydney Archives, and of course I'd like to thank those who have put in the hard work over the last few years, our collection services, our conservation and our digitisation teams, who have worked tirelessly to bring these negatives to the catalogue for you to look at. And our last slide features Cabbage Man, as we at New South Wales State Archives Collection know him, because when I mentioned to my colleague Emily that I hadn't actually put this into the sequence of slides, she was very disappointed that her favourite image was not showing up. Now, we don't know who this person is, but if you know, please let us know. Thank you.